what American Political Science Association is? Maybe you've never heard of it, but it's good to remember this acronym. American Political Science Association, Administration of the Patrimony of the Apostolic See, is an economic body of the Roman Curia. Precisely, it's the Vatican's central bank. It's the financial institution entrusted with a very specific function, which is to manage the financial assets as well as the real estate of the Holy See, and to provide all the funds necessary for the functioning of the Roman Curia of the Vatican. That's right, it's truly the Vatican's central bank, the bank that serves as a reference point for any international operation. But it's not the only credit institution of the Vatican, or rather, it's not the only financial entity of the Vatican. There's been a lot of talk about another acronym, one with only 3 letters instead of 4. Institute for Works of Religion, Institute for Works of Religion. And today, June 18th, is a special date because it marks the 42nd anniversary of the discovery of the body of banker Roberto Calvi. We at the Inside History channel have decided to take a closer look inside what is one of the many mysteries straddling the Italian state and the Leonine walls, the mystery of Vatican finances. Where does the issue of Vatican money come from? Well, from the issues of the Risorgimento. In 1929, as previously discussed, the Kingdom of Italy, then under fascist rule, signed the Lateran Pacts with the Italian state. Financial instruments were also established to alleviate, as they say, the burden that the Vatican had to bear, always in quotation marks, due to the expropriations from the unification of Italy. All of this translates into a huge amount of money and property, an enormous amount of money, and they have to be managed somehow. Shortly after the Lateran Pacts in 1929, Pope Pius XI gave a special assignment to a banker. His name is Bernardino Nogara. He is entrusted with the administration of a new entity, the Special Administration of the Holy See. That's what it's called, but what is it? It's a container. Imagine a big box, a box where all the Vatican's money flows in. Money that comes from the Italian state and businesses. Money that comes from land income, from donations, from real estate, because the Vatican has an enormous real estate portfolio. And then the bonds, so many. Nogara is an excellent banker. He simply set 2 conditions to work with the Vatican. The first was not to have any moral obligations regarding the investments to be made. He doesn't want to hear about Catholic morals. The second is that he should be able to operate anywhere in the world. He is a banker with a broad internationalist outlook, and this is exactly the fortune of what will later become the IOR. When Nogara takes office and begins his work, he realizes that the church's money yields returns, but not enough. What does he do? He makes them yield, and he does it well. He invests a lot. At first, he invests in textiles. After all, in the early 1930s, he sees the boom of Italian textiles. He invests in Super Tessel, millionaire textile industries company, and Chiesa Viscosa, later Snaia Viscosa. And then he invests in Italgas. In the 1930s, gas supply starts to become widespread in Italian cities. Nogara also invests in insurance, such as Generali, as well as mortgage credit and Bastoghi, which is one of the most prestigious companies on the Italian stock exchange, in the Istituto Romano Beni Stabili, one of the largest real estate companies, and then in many other companies. In metallurgy companies, food production companies, and also electricity production companies, for example, in SADE, the famous one, the one of the Bayonne Dam. We have already talked about it in other videos that you can find on this channel, but it doesn't only invest in activities that are, all things considered, harmless, that are part of everyday life and can easily be accepted by Catholic morals. Bernardino Nogara is unscrupulous, he's not stupid, he's not foolish, and he's not even a gambler. But he doesn't want to hear about rules. So what does he do? He sells to Liri, to the Institute for Industrial Reconstruction. The shares in the banks that are about to go under, Banco di Roma, Banco di Santo Spirito, Credito Sardo, they're all struggling banks. Liri takes them on, and not at a bargain price, but at market price. The Vatican earns a lot from it and keeps reinvesting. Where? In real estate, which never goes out of style. It's always useful in pharmaceuticals, including industries that produce the first condoms. And here you might already want to smile thinking about the Church's doctrines on contraception, abortion, and weapons. That's right, Berlandino Nogara invests the Church's money in the Reggiane Mechanical Workshop, which produces machine guns and warplanes, in Breda, which produces rifles, machine pistols, cannons, in the National Aeronautics Company, and in Ansaldo, which produces armored cars, tanks, cannons, and warships. And all this, you may ask, how does it reconcile with the Catholic Church? It doesn't, but people pretend not to notice. Because if Bernardino Nogara's work is good and brings great results, why ask where the money comes from? Is it better to keep going like this? Nogara's work continues, and on June 27, 1942, Pope Pius XII established the Institute for Works of Religion, Institute for Works of Religion, which absorbs the old administration and becomes the direct financial instrument, while maintaining with the American Political Science Association, the future American Political Science Association, which would only be established later, the function of administering finances. The American Political Science Association will act as the central bank, while the Institute for Works of Religion will serve as the investment bank. They are two separate entities that are kept apart for a long time, but they essentially serve to support the financial side of the Vatican. You might ask, why would a religion need banks? Well, that's a valid objection, but your question will be answered several years later. A character we've already met, an American prelate of Lithuanian origin who comes from Illinois, from a city called Cicero, Paul Casimir Marcinkus. You can't run the Holy Church with a Hail Mary. You can't run the Holy Church with a Hail Mary. He often repeats it, just as he says that without money, nothing gets done, not even charity. Marcinkus knows exactly what he wants, and when he becomes head of the Institute for Works of Religion, he finds prosperity in many investments. One of the most lucrative is in the Società Generale Immobiliare, which owns a quarter of the city of Rome. Just to name one, but it owns much more than that. Think about the famous Watergate Hotel. Yes, the one from the scandal, the one where the famous group of plumbers was found, the professional burglars working for the Republican Party's election committee, the one that triggered a historic scandal in America. That's the Watergate. It's partly owned by Società Generale Immobiliare. However, Società Generale Immobiliare has a problem, because with the end of the 1960s, in the beginning of the 1970s, the period of tax exemption established by the Lateran Pacts comes to an end. Taxes have to be paid, something has to be done, but the Vatican doesn't want to pay those taxes. So what can be done? A man of providence is needed. In the past, it had been Mussolini of Veda, Michel Sindona, him, the banker from Patti, this mysterious man who wasn't exactly a banker. He was a lawyer, a specialist in tax law. He moved from Messina, where he studied, to Milan. He opened his consulting firm there and saw a bit of everything come through, including the lavish lifestyles of Brianza and Milan's wealthy elite, later called the Milano da Bere era. Sindona became the right man in the right place to get things done, to start moving money around, making properties disappear, and placing the controlling shares of Vatican companies in foreign countries, especially in tax havens. Is that the period when the Panamanian companies were created? Will they be called that? Actually, they're not only in Panama, but also in Luxembourg and Liechtenstein, anywhere there could be legislation favorable to anonymous companies. Do you know what an anonymous company means? Let me explain. There are various company types: general partnerships, simple companies, and limited partnerships, which have both a limited and a general partner. There are limited liability companies, which are the first example of capital companies. There are joint stock companies, the so-called Società PA. And then there are anonymous companies, which are basically capital companies with shares. But bearer shares. Don't you know what bearer shares are? It's very simple. In joint stock companies, before a shareholders meeting, several days in advance, the shareholders are required to deposit their shares. In this way, the shareholding structure is clear and transparent, and it's clear who owns what and how much voting right each person has in the meeting. It's a principle of transparency and therefore a very simple principle. In anonymous companies, this obligation to deposit shares doesn't exist, as the shares are bearer shares. They can pass from one hand to another within 24 or 48 hours, and no one will ever know anything about it. Well, these joint stock companies, these SAs, are established in Luxembourg, Panama, Liechtenstein. They have names, sometimes very exotic ones. They're called Money, Castelfin, and Nord Europe. Establishment, United Trading Corp, Bellatrix, Bellarosa, Starfield. They're empty companies. They're just shell companies where first stock packages are parked, then increasingly larger amounts of money. Sindona does it first until his shady games with international currency exchanges, that is, with money, leave him broke. And then his successor arrives, him Roberto Calvi, the man whose 42 and death anniversary we remember today. It's Calvi's turn to take Sindona's place. It's Calvi's turn to keep feeding those empty shells, shells that end up costing everything, even the very existence of Banco Ambrosiano. But it's not just the anonymous companies based abroad. IOR becomes a shareholder in many other companies, some Italian, others foreign. In addition to being a shareholder in some banks, including the Banca Cattolica del Veneto, we Venetians know something about that. In some cities, the signs remain visible even though the bank has been gone for a long time. During that period, this was the mid-1970s when he launched another bold operation. He sold the controlling stake of Banca Cattolica del Veneto and later of Credito Valtellinese to Banco Ambrosiano, owned by Roberto Calvi. It's an operation that should bring a benefit. In reality, it's one of the many so-called mirror operations that are used to hide something, to deceive the market. Even the consciences of the bishops of the dioceses of Triveneto are shaken. It was them. Many, they were the main shareholders. One by one, beginning with Patriarch Albino Luciani, future Pope John Paul I, they withdraw their deposits in protest. The Institute for Works of Religion at the end of the 1970s starts to become a hot issue, a matter that many people don't like. The first one who doesn't like it is Albino Luciani himself, and he is the one who decides to get to the bottom of things in the Institute for Works of Religion. But as we know, Albino Luciani doesn't last long on the throne of Peter. Then another one comes. That other pope is Karol Wojtyła, John Paul II, who at first is much more cautious than his predecessor. Also, American Political Science Association, the administration of the patrimony of the Apostolic See, has arrived in the meantime. And if the Institute for Works of Religion is nominally under a cardinal commission, whose members, however, turn a blind eye and are happy to sign off on the accounts in exchange for a donation to charitable works. The American Political Science Association is under the supervision of Secretary of State Charlio Agostino Casaroli. Some impressive names pass across that desk. All very influential names, and they are much more careful in managing that money. The exact opposite of the Institute for Works of Religion. When bodies start piling up, that's when all of Italy and then the world notice the Institute for Works of Religion. I didn't use bodies piling up by accident. The first body literally falls from the sky. It's June 17, 1982. Roberto Calvo has been on the run for days after escaping Milan, and his whereabouts are unknown. He was due to face an appeal trial and is under investigation for a matter involving Banco Ambrosiano. But he slipped away quietly without telling anyone. Many people, including his lawyer and the prosecutor's office, are searching for him, but he's missing. Where he went will be revealed later. He relied on Flavio Carboni, the Sardinian fixer, and on a smuggler from Trieste, Silvano Vittor. They took him. By motorboat, then from there to Austria, to the Kleinzig sisters, and then by plane to London. On June 17, 1982, there was a dramatic meeting of the board of directors of Banco Ambrosiano. It was a meeting in which Roberto Calvi was removed as chairman in absentia. The board of directors, except for one person. The banker Orazio Bagnasco, votes in favor of the liquidation request, asking the Bank of Italy to send a commissioner. The meeting isn't even over yet. You can hear people shouting. She jumped from the 4th floor, Graziella Corriere, Calvi's secretary. They found her dead, smashed in the inner courtyard. She left only a letter in which she curses Calvi for all the harm he has done, and in which she asks to inform her sister very gently because she has a weak heart. It's the first corpse that falls from above. The second one doesn't fall but resurfaces. And the next morning in London, under the Fraternity Bridge, from the tide of the Thames, the body of Roberto Calvi emerges. Mentally, no one recognizes him. He shaved his mustache. In his pockets, they find money and rubble. It's a setup. He didn't hang himself. They strangled him, then hung him from a scaffold. A few years later, the third dead man, Michel Sindona, will die by suicide. So in the end, it's decided inside the Boghera super prison with a spiked coffee, but it wasn't just spiked with a strong liquor, with something even worse. They are notable deaths. While the whole world is watching Rome and watching Milan, watching Italian finance, which reacts in a united way, thanks also to the coordination of Minister Beniamino Andreatta. In Rome, people grow silent. The Italian judiciary demands that Marcinkus and his collaborators, Manini and De Strobel, pay for their actions, because those letters of patronage they had issued to a Calvi, pressured by letters confirming ownership of the Panamanian companies and the others, always established in tax havens. Those letters pinned the IOR to its responsibilities. There was a letter of indemnity written by Calvi, possibly under duress or blackmail, meant to nullify the letters of patronage. But for the Italian judiciary, all this is not enough. Marcinkus doesn't pay. He's a Vatican citizen. The extradition agreements in his case do not apply. Manini and De Strobel avoid payment by making the money untraceable in the Vatican, which refuses to turn them over to justice. This is the first of the great Vatican finance scandals. It's not the only one. Yeah, because a few years later in 1993, in the case of the Maxi Tangenti Enamont, it was discovered that the Institute for Works of Religion sent false information to the Italian judiciary. A whopping 108 billion liar treasury certificates, and money meant to be laundered passed through the Institute for Works of Religion. The Institute for Works of Religion simply shrugged it off again, as it had in other cases. In 2007, before that, in 2005, another major scandal erupted involving the smart guys from the neighborhood. Do you remember them? Ricucci, Fiorani, and Coppola were ruthless businessmen aiming to control Italian finance, but they failed. But one of them, Fiorani, talks to the magistrates and says that several billion euros, not liar, euros, which is even more money, are still involved. They went from IOR to American Political Science Association, and from there to the Swiss branch of the Banca della Svizzera Italiana. Banca della Svizzera Italiana, which is about to merge with an old acquaintance from the scandals of Marco Ambrosiano. That is, the Bank of Gottardo Fiorani even admits to having paid 15 million euros under the table to American Political Science Association. For what? For consulting. We can imagine what kind, but that's not enough. The name of the IOR comes up in many investigations. The G8 La Maddalena investigation involving builder Angelo Balducci. The investigation into money laundering operations. The investigation into the mafia, because mafia informants talk and clearly say that a lot of money, mafia money, has passed through the IOR, Francesco Marino Manoia, the one described by Judge Falcone as one of the most valuable collaborators of justice in his fight against organized crime. He clearly says that Cosa Nostra's billions were laundered inside the IOR through the intercession of Licio, Gelli, Sindona, and Calvi. Calvi was allegedly killed by Francesco Di Carlo, a former mafioso expelled from Cosa Nostra, strangled and then hanged from that scaffolding under the Thames. His crime was taking some of the funds he was supposed to launder. Then there's also the Magliana gang. Some of the bearer bonds and other government securities were disputed in their transfer within the IOR. They supposedly belonged to the bosses, to Ernesto Diotalavi, to Sormemo, to the Strazzini, and to the loan sharks, to whom the gang entrusted the money for laundering. Imagine a world of crime, a dirty world, a dark world that turns to a bank, the bank of religion, the bank of a state, that should promote a morality to clean what is dirty. I know it's something that scares you, that disgusts you. I understand. I also find it hard to believe certain things. Some truths are judicial, established, and absolute. Others result from reconstructions or investigations. In Coach, or about other scandals like the Vatileaks one, maybe you've heard about it, a scandal that led to the resignation of Ettore Gotti Tedeschi, president of the Institute for Works of Religion. Why is that? Well, because sometimes scandals are also useful for cleaning things up. Since February 15th, 2013, with the appointment of Ernst von Freiberg, who then resigned the following year and was replaced by Jean-Baptiste de François, the Institute for Works of Religion has started a serious internal restructuring towards greater transparency and the fight against money laundering. The accusations, which have continued over the decades for sometimes careless management, and in other cases bordering on criminal consequences, that management must change. There must be no more. The accusations coming from justice collaborators of bags overflowing with cash that are anonymously deposited inside that stronghold where the bank is located. I'll conclude this video with a few thoughts. The first is, as much as it's necessary for a sovereign state to have its own central bank, and therefore the APS, is it really necessary for such a small sovereign state to have a bank like IOR, which deals with issues, sometimes morally questionable, regarding the religion itself? The second reason is that the Vatican has always opposed handing over the men involved in the scandals. If there was nothing to hide, if everything was clear, if the guilt is personal and never collective, why didn't Marcinkus, Manini, and Distrobo pay? The third and final reflection, if the Gospels report that Jesus Christ drove the merchants out of the temple after overturning the tables of the money changers and railing against those who lent money at usury. For what reason? That which is a direct descendant of Christian preaching, namely the Vatican, really can't do without a financial dimension. Other churches, other denominations simply rely on the generosity of the faithful. Or, as happens in Switzerland, they admit to providing a public service precisely for the citizen, and therefore it is up to the state to support them. What need is there to have large real estate assets, shareholdings, controlling stakes, bonds? Is this necessary? Would Jesus Christ approve? I leave these thoughts to you. Who knows? Maybe, as has already happened in other videos, negative comments will come and insults will come too. There will be experts or those who consider themselves experts who will tell us that we're getting everything wrong, that you shouldn't criticize the church. However, I want to reserve an additional question for these people. Of course, no one criticizes morality, no one criticizes religious teaching. Why can't you separate religion from everything that accompanies it in a tangible, we could say secular way, and above all, from financing religion? Think about it and let me know in the comments or by email if you want. Do you have the address? Have a good day, everyone.